Hi, I'm Gail Crosman and I'm here with Beaducation today to go over some simple beginner project earrings made out of felt and glass beads. These are little acorns, and wanted to talk just a minute about different materials that you might use. Oftentimes I will, in the case of the one that I will work on today, I use a magatama as the top bead, but it's fun to sometimes build up a sequence of beads from large to small. You could start with a 6 and go to an 8 and to an 11 and to a 15, or do 3 15s at the top, a little picot. The sky's really the limit, and the fun part about this is it isn't a huge time investment, and so you can experiment with color and texture, and I hope you have some fun. I wanted to take a minute to show you some possibilities that color choices and textures. In this particular one, what I've done is I've used 2 different sequins, a flower cup above a serrated sequin, and with magatamas on top, which diffuses the light nicely. We'll talk about the ear wires later. I have a few different options on that also. And I'm going to show you next a collection of the materials that you might use in order to get started. I wanted to take a minute to explain the materials that you need in order to complete this project. There are many different things you can choose in place of these, but I'll go through what I've used in order to make this earring. Here we have size 10 beading needles, 2 sizes of sequins. In this case, if you didn't have sequins or wanted to use something else, maybe some Bali silver spacers would be lovely, or little rondelles. I've used magatamas for the top glass here. You know, once again, the sky's the limit. You can use 11s, 15s. I like to make a little picot topping sometimes. These are gold fill ear wires that sink down into the earring. And I do suggest wearing a rubber nut on the end of these because they are so light they get caught in your clothing. So you'll need fleece, of course, and it comes in so many different colors. You can blend it, or you can just use it as it comes. It can be purchased at some yarn stores, but you would want to look into that before you made a trip out because they don't all carry it. But you can always Google it, and I do sell it on my website, gailcrosmanmore.com. I use a size D Nymo. I always use the largest thing I can for any given project. So the size 10 beading needle is helpful in that it has a large enough eye to accommodate the D. This needle is used to puncture a hole in the fleece that you'll then use a 2-step epoxy to glue the finding down into the earring. And the good part about this particular needle is, I don't know if you can see the tip, it's a broad tip leather sewing needle, and you can find it at any Joann's or a fabric store. Another thing that you will need in order to secure the ear wire into the earring is a 2-part epoxy. I get this at a hardware store, and I choose the 5-minute just because it sets up quickly. The toothpicks are used for stirring, and everything that I use with my epoxy is disposable. So when the time comes to show you how to mix it and use it, we'll work on a little piece of paper, and that and the toothpicks will get thrown away. We're going to start this project by pulling off a little bit of fleece from this ball, and you want to guide it the whole way down. The way that you start a bead is by rolling. I change axis as I go just to get it as round as possible. Now you want to figure on about 33% shrinkage. And it's really easy to get your earrings too big too quickly. So I'm going to call it quits about there. I'm going to pull this little tail off so that there are all these receptive fibers, because they're what need to join their neighbors. I'm going to tuck that in. Going to use a squirt of Dawn detergent, or any detergent will work. I always have some auxiliary soap, and you'll see why in just a moment. When I submerge this, I want to hold the little bundle closed so that it doesn't unravel. And I'm just going to submerge it until the bubbles stop. I'm going to bring it out. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this supplementary, and I'm going to pat soap all around that little ball. It's like a newborn baby at this point. You want to just pat, pat, pat as gently as you can. And once you've applied a little bit of soap to the entire area, you really feel the fibers start to join their neighbors. It changes immediately. And move this out of the way. And I just start to roll, barely adding enough pressure to move it around in my hand. Just using the cupped area of my hands. And you just feel it start to change very, very slowly, but distinctly. You can feel it. You can feel a difference in the fibers. And just add progressively more pressure. If you press down too quickly, what you tend to do is to create fissures, big crevices or cracks. And there's an easy way to fix that, which I'll show you in a minute if that happens to you. I always reserve a little bit of the fleece, dry fleece, in whatever color I'm using, in case I need to do any repair work. The beauty of felt is that you always can fix it. I'm rolling away. I'm going to look at this to see if there are crevices, and there is evidence of a little crevice here. So what I'm going to do is put it down, make sure my hands are dry. You never want to contaminate your dry fleece with wet. And I want to get enough fleece to just cover that crevice, but to go the whole way around. That's all you need to do. And tear it off so you have that nice end again. I'm going to go back to the water, submerge, and start all over again, just like the newborn baby. Because what's happened is, my work up to this point has started to seal the surface of the bead. So I need to coax these new fibers, these new tender fibers, into those that have started to seal up. So if I go too hard, too fast, they'll felt on the underside and never adhere. So it's just starting out really gently again. If by chance you have too much soap, you might find that you don't have enough friction to move the ball about your hands. And if that happens, just go back into your water and rinse some of the soap away. It's really funny. People's pHs really affect how much suds they have. So if I'm teaching a class and a couple of people are sharing a bucket of water, one person might just be soap laden and her neighbor might not have any suds apparent at all. It's really interesting. Personal pH problems. So I'm going to go a little bit faster with a little more pressure here. At this point, you might want to go back into the water to get rid of a little bit of that extra soap and possibly to recharge it with hot water. Hot water speeds up your process. But I've also felted plenty with cold water when climate dictated that hot water was just too uncomfortable. It's easier to work harden your bead in this circular motion. If you want to shape it into something different, you'll wait until it's, the word is called fulling. Fulling is the work hardening. Felting is the original transition that happens between the fibers when they start to anchor to their neighbors. but the fulling is what I'm doing here when I'm starting to add more pressure and really toughen it up. But if I decided at this point I wanted to turn this into, say, a square bead and started to go like this, you see how squishy that still is? I'd be at it forever. So instead, I would work it. And then in the very end, I will spend time in the shaping after it's hard. So what I'll show you in a minute, you notice the foam coming out of this? I'm adding quite a bit of pressure. You can't get good felt without effort. That's just the way it is. Great for the pectoral muscles, though. Okay, so I'm going to give it a rinse. And now I might work on the shaping. You notice it's quite a bit firmer now. And in the case of our earrings, we're going to turn it into a little football. So instead of going around and around in circles, I'm making it longer. A little ellipse. And if I want a nice pointy end on it, I tell my hands what to do. It's going to be this motion. There's one end with a little bit of a point. I'll do that same thing here. And there's the base for my earrings. What we'll do, and I usually wait until it's dry, is we'll come in and cut this in half. So here we have the dried bead, and our next job is to cut it in half. I neglected to show you earlier in the materials that you would need that you need to have a way to cut this bead in half. And there are several tools that can do that. What I have here is a tissue blade that can be purchased I'm sure through any medical place or places that deal with polymer clay. I also use occasionally that dreaded box cutter, but that's great because I buy ones with break-off blades, so I always have a sharp edge. But ultimately what you want to have is something sharp enough that is going to cut your bead in half. So we determine where center is and just start to cut. Now this cutting board is not mandatory either. You can stop here and just roll it a little bit, so you're never really even contacting the surface. Okay, so you say that's right in the middle. Now at this stage the surface here is not felted enough to have the integrity necessary to hold your seed beads on. So what I always do is I go back into my water and I get it wet. I bring it out here and I get my soap again and I just sort of create a little skin on that surface. I can use my hand. There's a little abrasion. And that just turns the fibers over on themselves a little bit, enough to anchor your needle and thread. And so then we would go back and we would rinse it and let it dry again. Okay, so shape it the way you want it. After you've rinsed it in clean, clear water, the final way that you manage your felted work is to give it a good clear rinse in a cool water and then in a vinegar rinse. And what the vinegar does, it brings it back to a neutral pH. The soap in the beginning and throughout your process does two things. It changes the pH of the fibers, which lets the scale swell up and be more receptive to their neighbors, and it also lubricates this, but it also attracts dirt. So in the end, you want to get all available soap out, and to start that with a good clean rinse in clear water, but you finish it up with white vinegar, and you just need to add a dash to a bowl of water. The vinegar rinse is simply probably 1/8 of a cup to a gallon. Too much isn't going to hurt it, nor is really too little, but it gets rid of all the available soap and makes it ready to move on. So at this stage, after it's all rinsed and ready to dry, I just reshape it into the shape I want it to dry in and set it aside. At this step, we will make sure that our ear wires are securely embedded into our felt beads. And the way that we do that is, once again, using this needle with a thick end, we just pick this up and stick it in the center. Just give it a little bit of a turn. And then we'll do the same thing with the other one. And the trick to epoxy is just to try and approximate equal parts of each part. So I usually just put a little pea size down there. Epoxy is not friendly stuff. You don't want to do it around where you eat. You don't want to get it on your hands. That's why everything I use is disposable at this phase of the operation. Toothpicks, I'll use one to mix it well. Of course, this is a lot more than I need, but it is easier to get an equal amount of your epoxy by using a little bit more than you'll need if you're just doing a small project like this. You'll see it almost goes to clear in the mixing. Especially it sets up a lot quicker in a warmer climate. So I'm just going to pick this up, get some epoxy on here, and it will run off a little bit. That's why we do this first, because we know exactly where we need to place our sequins to cover that up. Now, depending upon where you want the ear wire to fall, I like to have a little added length there, and you might even come in, oh my goodness, we are in the climate of warm. All right, there we go. That was enough for one. We'll mix up another batch. That's amazing. I was just about to say, if I didn't complete that thought, that depending upon your climate, the warmer it is, the quicker it sets up. That's amazing. Here in California, look what happens. Hmm. 5-second epoxy is more like it. Okay, let's try that again. Now these ear wires are commercially available. I got these through Rio Grande, but if you go back to Beaducation.com and you look at Lisa's free video on ear wires, you can follow all the steps with the exception of the one where she puts a loop at the end here, and you just leave that straight leg there in order to have something to glue down into your piece. And then I get rid of these. Throw them right away, get them out of your way. Don't put them, they generate quite a bit of heat as they cure. This is quite hot right here, right now. So you want to consider that when you throw them away, that you don't have it near some flammable stuff. But get them out of your breathing area, and obviously they're dry now and they're ready to sew, which will be our next task. In any of my beading work, I like to use Nymo D if the project can accommodate it. D is the thickest Nymo that's available, and I double it. I start out usually with 2 yards worth of length, and I want to show you a cool little knot. The tails are going off to the left. I put my needle over the end perpendicular to the threads, and then depending upon how large I want my knot to be will determine how many times I wrap around my needle. So I usually do 3 or 4 in this case, because I can cover my knots up nicely with sequins and such, and then I want to hold on to those loops and pull the needle through. I don't wax. I don't use microcrystalline. And look at what I have. A bad knot. I could still use that. I would cut it off here like this. But I'm going to show you that again, because I like something a little cleaner. So I'm going to start with that tail again. I'm going to wrap. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to pull that through. There we go. So there we've got that knot. I trim it at the end. And we're ready for the next phase. So when I start to sew on these earrings, I'll start in the center here, and this is where my knot will end up. And my needle will come out where I want to apply my first embellishment. I'll just pick these up in sequence on how I want them to lay down. Of course, this one is on the bottom. And here's the second one, and here's the third one. I'll lay it down. What I do when I go down and I make my stitch is I leave a little space so I have a nice anchor there. Then I'll come here and I'll come out here where I want my next one to be. Now, it's always a good idea to cinch those down a little bit so that they're really nicely anchored. I mean, you could pull too hard that you could really deform the base. But, so now I'm going to pick up this second series, and I just sort of do a dance back and forth on the surface here on where I want to place the next bead. You don't need to bend your needle in order to get it right next to the one before. So now I'm going to come out over here. I'll put 3 or 4 of these down. Then we'll take a little break. It's always interesting in the case of the magatamas, they have different size bases. So I use that to my advantage sometimes, whether I need a larger or a smaller one. Coming out here. I want to review this stitch with you. I've got my 3 loaded up here. I've gone through the magatama, the thread's coming out here, and I'm going back down the 2 sequins. and then coming out in the next space that I want to fill. And here we go again. We just keep going till it's as full as we'd like it to be. Just pull through. This needle is coming out in the last position where I'd like to place my last series of beads and sequins. And then we'll check them over, see how it all looks. If we're satisfied with the rhythm. Oh, look at that. There's a loose one. So what I'm going to do is show you how to fix that. I come up there. The beauty of felt is you just can travel incognito throughout the whole thing. I love that when I'm sewing onto, pieces of flat felt, I can hide every single stitch. So I'm going to come out where I'd like to finish this off, and I'll show you how to do that. Just cinch that down. And the way I finish this is I come in here like this, and I do a half hitch times 3. I slide it underneath the sequin. A little guidance there. 1. If you find it gets too lofty or too high, you can decide to put your second one on underneath another sequin. Do another half hitch. And go to my third. I'll come back to the one position down here. And we'll trim it off. Voila. So how was that? Isn't it great to learn something new? I love the power of felt in that you can even build your own house. The yurts in Mongolia, that's what they make them out of. And you can see how that can happen, just managing the material differently. I think it's great, and I hope that you find it to be fun, and come back and see us for another class if you want to pursue the material a little bit further. Thanks.